Welcome to the Emerging History channel. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out more videos like this one. Here is the face of the Great Depression etched with the worry of a 32-year-old mother supporting 10 children. Dorothea Lange captured this moment not just as a portrait of poverty, but as an enduring symbol of maternal resilience. Tensions boil over outside the Ford River Rouge complex in April 1941, where striking workers and their families aren't just demanding fair pay. They boldly accuse Henry Ford of Nazi sympathies, turning a labor dispute into a moral battleground. Deep in the Alaskan wilderness lies the final resting place of Christopher McCandless in 1992. Hunters discovered the 24-year-old inside this abandoned bus where he had survived alone for 113 days before starvation tragically claimed his life. With a rifle in hand, 20-year-old Arifa stands guard over her village in 1987 as part of a pro-government women's unit in Afghanistan. She represents a fierce determination to defend her home against the Mujahideen during a brutal conflict. This captivating shot from the 1970s features Shelley Duvall, whose unique presence defined an era of cinema. Her wide-eyed, eccentric charm made her our unconventional icon, perfectly capturing the shifting, slightly surreal aesthetic of the decade. Fear is palpable in the eyes of Hajrish Zaberi, captured moments before his execution in 1992 in the streets of Bijeljina. He fell victim to the Tigers, a paramilitary unit whose brutality left a dark stain on Bosnian history. Born before the American Revolution in 1748, Mary Monroe Sanderson sits for a portrait in 1852. This image bridges a gap of over a century, capturing a woman whose life spanned the birth of a nation and the dawn of photography. A stark reminder of hatred. In 1981 Mobile, Alabama, where 19-year-old Michael Donald was brutally lynched by the Klan, this tragic event sparked outrage and eventually led to a historic lawsuit that bankrupted the local hate group responsible. Violence tears through Cyprus in 1964, leading a pregnant 16-year-old to take up arms, driven by grief and a need for vengeance after her husband's kidnapping. She embodies the desperate measures forced upon civilians during intercommunal warfare. Gravity claims a victory over early aviation in this 1915 scene from Belgium. A French pilot's attempt at an emergency landing ends awkwardly in the branches of a tree, highlighting the fragile and experimental nature of World War I flight. Amidst the ruins of war in 1944, a French priest offers a moment of spiritual solace to Canadian soldiers. It is a quiet interlude of faith and connection, providing a brief respite before the chaos of the front line resumes. Captured here is a remarkable transformation of identity. In 1908, a German traveler is pictured before and after his journey to the Ottoman Empire. His Western suit traded for traditional garb, illustrating the profound influence of cultural immersion. Respect transcends the battlefield as German soldiers bury a fallen RAF airman with full military honors in 1943. It is a poignant display of chivalry, acknowledging the Iowarm, a shared sacrifice of combatants even amidst the bitterness of World War II. The aircraft carrier HMS Hermes receives a hero's welcome at Portsmouth Harbor in July 1982, returning from the Falklands. The ship is surrounded by a flotilla of small boats, marking a triumphant end to a tense and distant conflict. An American NCO strikes a casual pose with his sidearm and a cigarette in France, circa 1918. This doughboy embodies the swagger and relief of the Allied forces as the brutal trench warfare of the Great War finally nears its end. Fishermen in Tetyushi pose with a staggering catch from the Volga River in 1921. This beluga sturgeon, weighing over a ton, looks almost prehistoric, serving as a reminder of the massive creatures that once roamed the world's waterways. Paris celebrates victory with a daredevil stunt. In 1919, a biplane threads the needle through the Arc de Triomphe, a breathtaking feat of flying intended to honor the chaotic glory of the aviators who served in the Great War. Height differences create a surreal tableau in Normandy as Canadian Corporal Bob Roberts accepts a surrender. He stands dwarfed by a captured German soldier measuring 7'6", a towering reminder that war draws in men of all shapes and sizes. Hollywood glamour is immortalized in concrete as Carmen Miranda leaves her prints at Grauman's Chinese Theater in 1946. The Brazilian bombshell cemented her legacy, bringing a vibrant explosion of Latin culture to the silver screen during the Golden Age. The tables turn in Amsterdam, May 1945, as Dutch resistance members pose with a captured collaborator. The courtyard setting frames a moment of reckoning where those who aided the occupation finally face the judgment of their liberated countrymen. A young Grover Norquist and Jack Abramoff stand with President Ronald Reagan capturing a meeting of generations. This photo documents the early days of future political power brokers basking in the presence of the conservative movement's defining figure. Hermann Göring takes aim with a hunting rifle received for his birthday. In 1941, the image captures the indulgence of the Nazi elite enjoying leisurely blood sport while their regime plunged the rest of the world into total war. Romance blooms in the City of Light as a couple embraces beneath the Arc de Triomphe. In 1964, it is a timeless snapshot of Parisian love, capturing the carefree spirit and elegance that defined the city in the swinging 60s. Critics were fooled in 1964 by the abstract works of Pierre Brosseau, who was actually a chimpanzee named Peter. This Swedish experiment hilariously exposed the pretension of the art world, proving that sometimes the difference between genius and primate is indistinguishable. Photographers gather before a B-26 Marauder named Pappy's Pram in 1943. These men, armed with cameras instead of guns, played a crucial role in documenting the aerial war, ensuring the history of these missions would not be forgotten. Patriotism comes in a small package in this adorable 1906 photograph. A child decked out in stars and stripes for the 4th of July embodies the innocent, enthusiastic spirit of early 20th century American celebrations. A Polish soldier shares a quiet moment of connection with his horse in the late 20th century. Even as warfare modernized, this image highlights the enduring ancient bond between a cavalryman and his steed, grounded in trust and tradition. Polish troops display their mobilization readiness on a Sokol 1000 motorcycle in 1938 with a machine gun mounted on the sidecar. This unit represents the mechanization of the military just a year before the devastating outbreak of World War II. Pope Pius XII breaks with protocol to visit the bombed district of San Lorenzo in July 1943. His presence among the ruins and the traumatized citizens of Rome underscores the vulnerability of the Vatican during the chaos of the war. The sheer scale of history is evident. In the Prague Castle, archives where enormous liturgical books from the 1960s dwarf the librarian. These antiphanaries are a testament to the weight of tradition and the physical grandeur of religious devotion. President Zia-ul-Haq attempts to project a man of the people image cycling to his office in Islamabad. In 1980, it is a carefully curated moment of populism, contrasting the humble bicycle with the complex and often turbulent reality of his military rule. High in the Alps during World War I, a priest celebrates Mass for soldiers surrounded by snow. This makeshift altar on the mountain peak offers spiritual fortification to men facing both the enemy and the harsh freezing elements. The fate of the Axis powers is sealed near Casablanca in January 1943. Churchill and Roosevelt sit side. by side agreeing that unconditional surrender is the only acceptable outcome, a decision that would define the brutal final years of the war. Politics meets the pitch as Winston Churchill shakes hands with Newcastle United players before the 1952 FA Cup final. The Prime Minister's presence highlights the cultural importance of football in Britain, serving as a unifying pastime, even for the elite. A tragic shadow hangs over this 1908 photo of Tsarevich Alexei and his sailor Nanny Derivenko. The sailor was assigned to protect the hemophiliac prince from injury, a poignant symbol of the fragility that plagued the doomed Romanov dynasty. Royalty meets Hollywood royalty in 1982 as Princess Diana accepts an E.T. doll surrounded by the young cast, and Steven Spielberg, the Princess of Wales, bridges the gap between the monarchy and the global pop culture phenomenon of the decade. The vivid colors of Sergei Prokudin-Gorsky bring a grim reality to life in the Emirate of Bukhara circa 1910. These prisoners, shackled in a traditional zindan or dungeon, stare back from a world of archaic justice under the watchful eye of Imperial Russia. Uniformity strips away individuality in this stark view of the Georgia State Prison in 1937 during the meal hour. The repetitive rows of striped uniforms highlight the dehumanizing machinery of the American penal system during the Depression era. A grisly scene from 1918 reveals the bodies of prisoners at Vyborg prison, victims of the brutal Finnish Civil War. These frozen corpses serve as a testament to the savagery that erupted when political ideologies tore a nation apart. Not all voices in 1968 called for peace in New York City. A massive crowd gathers to support the Vietnam War, illustrating the deep and bitter divide that fractured American society as the conflict overseas raged on. Driven by gold fever, a long line of prospectors struggles up the icy slopes of the Chilkoot Pass. In 1897, this human chain scaling the gateway to the Yukon captures the sheer desperation and hope that fueled the Klondike Gold Rush. Amidst the bitter cold of the Korean War in 1951, Private Dick Powell shares a meal with his puppy Fuzzy. It is a tender moment of humanity near the front lines, where a small dog offers comfort against the harsh backdrop of combat. 72,000 people erupt at Wembley Stadium on July 13, 1985, as Queen takes the stage in a defining moment of rock history. Freddie Mercury commands the massive crowd, turning a charity concert into a global celebration of music and unity. A somber mood hangs over the RMS Olympic in Plymouth just days after the loss of her sister ship, the Titanic, in April 1912. The grand vessel stands as a melancholic reminder of the tragedy that shattered the illusion of unsinkable engineering. In a meeting that history would view with complex irony, President Reagan hosts Afghan Mujahideen leaders in 1983, framed then as freedom fighters against the Soviets. This alliance underscores the enemy of my enemy doctrine that defined Cold War geopolitics. The cable ship Mackay Bennett performs a mournful duty in the North Atlantic. April 1912, crewmen haul the body of a Titanic victim from the freezing water, a stark and heartbreaking conclusion to the glamorous voyage that ended in disaster. History flips the script in this 1944 image as European refugees flee the carnage of World War II to seek safety in the Middle East. It serves as a poignant reminder that the search for sanctuary is a universal human experience. The past sails into the present as a replica of the Mayflower arrives in New York Harbor in November 1957, escorted by a modern fleet. This vessel bridged 3 centuries, celebrating the enduring legacy of the early pilgrims in American history. Fear grips the streets of Asturias in October 1937, following a nationalist victory during the Spanish Civil War. This scene of repression highlights the brutal aftermath of the conflict, where ideological triumph was often followed by the persecution of the defeated. A heartbreaking divide separates families in May 1961 as West Berliners lift their children for grandparents in the East to see the newly erected wall-turned city streets into borders, tearing families apart and leaving only distant waves as a means of connection. Decades before becoming a controversial figure in global politics, Rinat Akhmetshin participates in a training exercise with the Soviet Army in the 1980s. This snapshot captures a young soldier serving a superpower that was slowly edging toward its final collapse. Chaos erupts near the Place de la Concorde on February 6, 1934, as rioters clash with mounted police. This explosion of political violence shook the foundations of the French Third Republic, signaling the Allies a dangerous polarization sweeping through Europe between the wars. Deep inside the boiler of a frigate, Lorenzo Perriard and André Chausset work in cramped, deafening conditions. In 1943, these shipyard workers embody the relentless industrial effort required to build the massive fleets that ultimately secured Allied victory. Captured by the Royal Doctor, this view of Riyadh in the 1950s shows a city on the cusp of transformation. Mud brick architecture dominates the landscape, offering a final glimpse of traditional Saudi life before oil wealth rapidly modernized the skyline. The flush of revolutionary victory is evident in 1959 as journalist Robert Paneque stands beside Che Guevara. This image captures the charismatic energy of the new Cuban regime just as the island nation was beginning its dramatic pivot toward communism. A sea of young hands reaches out to touch Robert F. Kennedy during a 1964 campaign stop in New York. The intense, almost frantic adoration highlights the enduring emotional connection the Kennedy family held with the American public even after tragedy. A tender farewell unfolds at a Russian train station in 1914 as the Great War beckons. This couple steals a final moment of intimacy, unaware that the coming conflict would not only separate lovers, but topple their entire empire. Opulence on wheels defines the Romanov imperial train. In the 1890s, this rolling palace designed for the Tsar's family stands in stark contrast to the rugged Russian countryside it traversed, symbolizing the immense wealth gap that would eventually fuel a revolution. Patriotism soars on July 4, 1982, as Ronald and Nancy Reagan welcome astronauts Hartsfield and Mattingly back from space. Standing before the shuttle Enterprise, the moment celebrates American technological dominance and the renewed national pride of the early 80s. The heart of Rotterdam lies obliterated in May 1940, flattened by the Luftwaffe's terrifying bombardment. This aerial view of urban destruction marked a ruthless new chapter in warfare, where civilian centers became primary targets to force immediate capitulation. A deceptive calm surrounds Rosa Shanina, a Soviet sniper who became a legend during World War II, responsible for 59 confirmed kills. This young woman's steely gaze reflects the deadly precision required to survive and triumph on the Eastern Front. Once a symbol of medieval prosperity, the Cloth Hall in Ypres stands as a jagged skeleton between 1915 and 1918. Its destruction came to symbolize the senseless cultural erasure wrought by the relentless artillery barrages of the First World War. Deep in the jungle in 1890, explorer Alfred Maudslay captures the crumbling majesty of Lakamha, now known as Palenque. This early photograph helped introduce the world to the sophistication of the ancient Maya hidden for centuries beneath the overgrowth. Nightmarish figures emerge from the fog of war in this image of Russian soldiers wearing early gas masks. These primitive hood-like devices underscore the terrifying introduction of chemical weapons, which turned the battlefields of World War I into toxic wastelands. History. reveals a strange alliance in this shot of the Asano detachment. These were Russian exiles fighting for the Japanese puppet state of Manchukuo, turning their weapons against their own countrymen in a desperate, ideologically complex border war. Whimsy meets warfare in 1915 as a Russian pilot poses in his Benz aircraft with an unlikely co-pilot, a bear cub. This surreal moment of humor offers a glimpse into the morale-boosting mascots that soldiers adopted to cope with the stress of combat. The brutality of close-quarters combat is etched into the face of this Russian soldier wounded during the Russo-Japanese War. His injury, likely from a saber, marks the transition era where 19th century cavalry charges clashed with the industrial killing power of the 20th century. Huddled within the earth, Russian soldiers stare out from the confines of a trench. Their weary expressions capture the universal soldiers experience the waiting, the dirt, and the camaraderie that forms in the narrow spaces between life and death. Life moves at a horse-drawn pace on Sackville Street, Dublin in 1890, dominated by Nelson's Pillar. This peaceful urban scene stands in stark contrast to the violence that would engulf and destroy this very thoroughfare during the Easter Rising just decades later. A futuristic sight greets Parisians in 1901. As Alberto Santos Dumont steers his dirigible around the Eiffel Tower, this daring flight proved that the air was navigable, turning the sky into a new frontier for human exploration and engineering. Rows of recruits stand at attention at a training school for black policemen in South Africa, 1978. This image highlights the complex dynamics of apartheid, where the state employed members of the oppressed majority to enforce its segregationist laws. Deep in the Florida Everglades in 1910, Charlie Cypress and his children pose in traditional Seminole attire. This portrait captures a moment of cultural resilience, preserving the heritage of a people who had long resisted displacement and adapted to life in the wetlands. The intensity of genius is visible in this portrait of Sergei Rachmaninoff. Known for his massive hands and sweeping romantic compositions, the Russian composer's somber expression reflects the emotional depth and exile that defined both his life and his music. Leisure Time takes on a modern look in 1928 Istanbul, where 7 men enjoy a picnic in Kagathane, sporting Western-style hats instead of fezzes. They embody the rapid cultural shifts sweeping through Turkey under the secular reforms of the new republic. Logic seems defied by this ship painted in dazzle camouflage during the World War I, designed not to hide the vessel, but to confuse enemy U-boat commanders about its speed and direction. This dizzying art form saved countless lives at sea. Cultures collide on a dusty road in Sicily. 1943, a diminutive peasant points the way for a towering American soldier, a simple gesture of cooperation that helped pave the way for the Allied liberation of Europe, one village at a time. Smoke billows from the Italian cruiser Bartolomeo Colleoni after a fatal blow from HMAS Sydney in July 1940. This dramatic snapshot from the Battle of Cape Spada captures the violent end of a warship in the struggle for control over the Mediterranean. A sea of faces fills Hanoi in July 1976, celebrating the official reunification of North and South Vietnam. After decades of war, this gathering marks the birth of the socialist republic, closing a bloody chapter and beginning the difficult process of national healing. Grim determination sets the faces of these soldiers manning a machine gun during the Battle of Arras in 1917. Amidst the mud and ruin, they hold the line, illustrating the defensive stalemate that defined the terrifying industrial slaughter of the Western Front. For a brief moment in 1915, the war is forgotten as German soldiers share a beer. These candid scenes of camaraderie offer a humanizing glimpse behind the enemy lines, showing young men finding small comforts before returning to the horror of the trenches. The absurdity of segregation is on full display in Cape Town 1989 as police use a helicopter to blast sand at anti-apartheid protesters on a whites-only beach. It was a desperate attempt to maintain a system that was rapidly crumbling under moral pressure.